The world is changing fast. New technologies, shifting social landscapes, and evolving ways of living can feel both exciting and overwhelming. So, how do we find balance? I'm Stephanie von Bismarck, activist, author, and digital educator. Welcome to my podcast, where each week I sit down with some of the world's best thinkers, trailblazers, and extraordinary people to explore how we can navigate this fast-moving world. We'll share practical tools and uncover inspiring ideas to help us all thrive and answer the simple question, how do we manage? Before we dive in, here's something to think about. How many social accounts do you have? What do you use them for? Are they working for you or are you working for them? My guest today is someone who knows the world of socials inside out. Matt Navarra is one of Europe's most well-known and in-demand social media consultants and industry experts. Early in his career, he even managed a Twitter account for then Prime Minister David Cameron. Since then, he's advised major players like Google, Meta, and the United Nations. Matt also lives with ADHD, something that's shaped both his career and his approach to digital technology. He brings a refreshingly practical perspective on how we can make the most of our socials without letting it take over our lives. Hi, Matt. Thank you for joining us today. It's really lovely to see you here on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So you sort of clearly had sort of the front row seat how these platforms have shaped the way we connect and we communicate up until today, right? Even how we think. So what is the biggest changes that you've seen recently?
Well, I don't know about recently, but certainly in terms of just the evolution of social media, if you think back to when, the beginnings of it for many people was, Facebook would have been one of the most well-known, as well as MySpace. We started off with these feed-based platforms where a running update of what your friends and people you cared about were up to in various platforms. And for many years, that was kind of the dominant sort of version of social media. And we had things like Twitter come on stream a little bit later. And then as we moved towards, the 2010s, and we started to have the rise of mobile devices and people's ability to create content started to grow, and the tools became better, quicker, cheaper, easier. We saw, platforms like Instagram and Snapchat and later on TikTok kind of really emerge as much more important platforms, or equally as important platforms as some of the first social media networks that were out there. We also have professional networks like LinkedIn, which increasingly in the last few years has sort of had a bit of a renaissance, a bit of a growth spurt because of the downfall of Twitter and X, and also people's general usage and expectations from social media has changed as well. And then I think more recently, the biggest kind of thing for many people will be AI and the impact of AI, whether it be through the way the algorithm works to give you even more kind of tailored results and gets you to be more engaged and spend more time on these platforms, through to ads being more targeted and more sophisticated, and then also being able to create content in a far easier way and doing things that maybe years gone by, only like 3 or 4 years ago, probably wasn't quite possible for many content creators because of the cost or the technical proficiency they needed. But AI has made that far easier.
So right now, if you listen to any or many public discussions, it seems as if social media is treated a little bit like a cancerous evil. How it affects our attention spans, our mental health, even democracy with all the misinformation. But do you think we focus really too much right now on what's negative and not highlight what's actually positive about it?
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful for government ministers or public figures to kind of try and compare social media to tobacco, for example, and say that it's a cancer and that it's as bad as cigarette smoking was for a generation before and things, because there was nothing redeeming about cigarettes. There was no health benefits. There was nothing positive that it gave to the world. However, social media does have quite a lot of things that it's done for the world. for people in areas of the world where they weren't able to get out messages about what's going on in their country. And, the Arab Spring, for example, and, Black Lives Matter movements. And there's a whole list of historical, cultural moments that really were born and only made possible by social media. And that's also not to mention the fact that you've got different types of user of social media that feel that they're understood and able to connect with like-minded people and on topics that maybe they find hard to talk about in real life to people that are around them. There's a whole list of benefits to social media, and the creator economy, and it has built the possibility for people to turn what was once a side hustle or a project into something that actually can be monetized and into a fully fledged business. And that's why we've seen this massive surge of TikTok famous people and creators creating publishing and media businesses and brands being born through social media. Like, for example, things to do with Mr. Beast would be a good example, and Skims with the Kardashians and many others all owe it to social media to some degree to make some of those things possible. So yeah, I think there's a lot positive, and maybe sometimes we can get hung up on all the negative side of it, but there are issues, and that's something that is not going to go away and does need to be tackled.
Is there actually such a thing as a healthy relationship with social media?
For certain types of users, I think it can be harder than for others, and people who are more vulnerable, obviously younger users, teenage users, or children that we all know use social media, even maybe when they're not meant to be, or the platforms so say don't permit them to do so. And I think that the risks of being addicted to social media for some can be greater, like it is risks of some people can gamble without having any addiction problems, but other people can, gamble excessively or drink excessively. So I think, like anything, there is a risk to some types of user. But I think it is possible through parenting, through schools, through some regulation, and through some self-control and understanding how these platforms work and how to kind of has more intentional, meaningful purpose for using social media, and balancing that with other things that are going on in your life. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but it certainly is possible.
For example, looking at children, you have children yourself, right?
Yeah, I have two teenagers. Well, I've got a 12-year-old turning 13 soon, and I've got a 15-year-old. And so I'm very aware of the challenges as a parent of kind of moderating their use of it and also making them safer online. It's a really difficult job in 2025 to kind of police your children's social media usage, but there are ways to do it. And I think a lot of it's about having open conversations, helping them understand how to navigate social media and understanding algorithms and understanding what may be seen online isn't necessarily all that, just the only perspective. It is one perspective, and often it's not the correct one in terms of if there's, misinformation or AI generated content, it just makes it that much harder. But it is extremely hard, but it's possible to have a positive relationship with social media in 2025.
So how did you do that with your own children? How did you introduce social media to them? How old were they, for example?
We decided to give them their first mobile phones around the final year of what we call primary school in the UK, so aged around about 11, sort of 10, 11, as their first mobile device. And within the controls on the iPhone, I can't talk for Android, but certainly on iPhone, there are ways that we've been able to limit their use of social media and use of their phone by saying that at a certain point in the evening, at least an hour or two before bed, it locks down. Their phone can't be used for anything, so they're not using it in that period when they're winding down. They also don't have that period in the morning when they're getting ready for school. It's also locked down. I also can see what they're viewing online by using the iPhone's different settings to kind of restrict or limit certain things like over 18 content and other mature sort of content that they shouldn't be looking at. But also it's just kind of talking to them about it, because one of the biggest challenges I've found with my children has been WhatsApp. Getting them to understand the dynamics of messaging, and that when you fall out with someone in a group chat and then someone kicks them out and then someone said something about them and shared something about them, that's quite intense for any child that hasn't had any experience of building, how to build, healthy friendships and relationships, let alone without adding social media and WhatsApp group chats into the mix. So a lot of it's about kind of making sure they're able to chat about these things, being, aware of kind of, how they're feeling feeling, if there's any signs that they're sort of struggling with things, and also giving them ways to kind of manage situations like that. And it's an ongoing process, I would say.
How would you see as an ideal start into social media for, let's say, someone who's 12 years old? How would you approach that?
Ultimately, the decision as to whether to let your child or teenager use social media is very much a personal one. And I think everyone's views on what age that is going to be different. And I think it's also different for different children because their level of maturity or their own vulnerabilities might dictate that, an age that I might say might be not appropriate for that particular child. So I think there's no hard and fast rules, what you feel is appropriate, knowing your children. But I think in terms of helping them navigate how these platforms work and what to do in certain situations if things become too much, helping them understand there are tools to block or to mute or restrict people, and also how to behave responsibly online, because I've certainly had experiences with my children where they've accused others of saying or doing something, or something's happened that's troubled them, and then you later find out, well, actually they're doing some of the same things that they're accusing other people of, which is not unusual for teenagers, I would say. So yeah, I think that's the starting point. But as to which platforms and at what age, I think you have to kind of understand their ability to cope with that and ease into that process, because ultimately most of their friends and family are using social media, and excluding them from it by blocking them or saying you can't have a device or can't use social media is actually a big part of how they communicate and engage and arrange and meet up with and connect with people that are local to them as well as people elsewhere. So I think it's an important part of their life that needs to be, eased in and made available to them.
You're such an expert and you're such an insider. How important do you think is it for parents to actually know the platforms themselves?
Pretty important, I would say. And I think most parents, not all, but most parents use social media. We've all grown up on it. And I'm of a generation that was, it's been around long enough even if I was a light user, you kind of get a good understanding of how they operate. I think it's important certainly for newer platforms, that if your child is using it, teenagers using it, it'd be sensible to kind of at least know what that platform's about and how it operates and things. But I think, parents haven't got the time to be there all day, every day, kind of checking up on what their individual children are doing. And I think that if knowing what I was like as a teenager, that when rules are put in place or things are done to kind of limit something you really want to do, children will work their way around it. And I think it was much the same when we had it, and there was a big upset around violent videos, and when there was a child that was murdered in the UK in the 80s, Jamie Bolger, and then there was, video games are causing children to be violent and things, and social media is part of that generational thing. This generation's gory videos and violent video games is social media, and we didn't ban video games. We didn't ban some of the videos. We just became more aware of what was appropriate, being able to be aware of what our children were watching or doing, and being a bit pragmatic about it. But that's certainly the way I've approached it, and I won't say that that's the only way, but that's certainly the way I've tried to kind of think of it.
So, what about online role models? A lot of people, our kids are following our so called influencers who might not really represent reality. Is that something we should be concerned about?
Social media has evolved fairly quite a lot in the last 20 years, in the sense that the early days of influencer marketing and sort of following celebrities and the Instagram aesthetic and kind of it all being very inspirational and aspirational, and it was like, this is the amazing life that I lead kind of style of content that was sort of started the ball rolling in the early days of the creator economy. That does still exist, but it has shifted quite a lot, and part of the reason of TikTok's success was because people, I think, got tired of that kind of that vibe, and people have become much more savvy and aware of the risks of comparing yourself to other people's lives and seeing things that were not realistic portrayals of what life is like. Certainly as a young teenager, male or female, who seeing people that they looked up to, but actually it was sometimes toxic or actually just made you feel miserable about yourself. And then TikTok kind of upended that somewhat, and the content shifted to something that was a bit more lo-fi, a bit more, not, I wouldn't say wholesome, but certainly more based in some sense of reality, and that people talk a lot more on social media about their own mental health, and people talk about all sorts of topics which previously maybe people were more, shy about, showing a vulnerability about. And so I think that has been a positive shift that we have seen. I constantly tell my children what they see online is only a very small slither of that particular creator or person's life, and that actually that is not a good sense of reality of what life is like, and not to take as best possible to realize that is the case. I don't think it actually makes a huge amount of difference. I think it's still one of the things that I think is very hard as a parent, and also hard for teenagers to navigate, because it's a human instinct to make comparisons about your life with someone else's. And if you're bombarded constantly algorithmically with kind of this portrayal of these perfect lives and all the happiness that's going on, and you're not in a good place in your life, certainly as a teenager that's still trying to understand the world and navigate their own kind of growing pains and problems at school and things, it can be, pretty toxic and pretty, dangerous, and not, not a nice place to be. And so that's why it's really important, I think, to understand where teenagers are spending their time, your teenagers are spending time, trying to be aware of their mood and their experiences online, and being, having that open relationship in all aspects of their life. And social media is one area where, you kind of can help them understand how to navigate it, and also realize how these platforms work, and how they can also have a negative impact, and help them, give them the tools and the insights as to have a more meaningful, intentional time. And I think that's the thing: meaningful, valuable, intentional, rather than mindless scrolling, which, to be fair, I think we all do. And so teenagers are no worse or no better than us adults, I don't think.
So tell me, you were diagnosed with ADHD in your late 20s. How has that diagnosis sort of changed the way you work with social media and how you use it?
It was very much transformational, because as soon as I started taking the medication, my career really took off quite quickly after that, because everything became far easier. There was less noise. I describe it as, to somebody who hasn't got ADHD, what it might have felt like is like the scene in the film Limitless, which is a film with Bradley Cooper, where he takes this drug and he takes it and then he walks up the stairs and everything becomes quite bright and clearer and easier. And it did feel quite like that in a less Hollywood way. But it did mean I got more work done. I had better relationship with work colleagues, and I could do more. And so, yeah, it was transformational. And it actually, what I've tried to do over the last sort of 15, 20 years after having the diagnosis, is to try and navigate towards things that really engage and excite me. Because if you have ADHD, if you try and do something you don't really want to do, and it's just a job for job's sake, and it's not exciting, and it doesn't fire your dopamine, then you're always going to have a bad time.
But social media, for example, is often criticized for shortening the attention span, right? And someone with ADHD, do you think these platforms make it harder to focus, or is there any way it also could have helped you?
I think that there is certainly an element of the way that social media works, in terms of it keeps showing you endless amounts of the same thing in short, quick succession. And it is very built to be an addictive activity. They want you to be there as long as possible. And often the content people engage with is short form video, is the dominant kind of format. And that leads you to kind of be flicking through endless amounts of things that are optimized to excite and appeal to you. And so when you're elsewhere, and the pace of activity and engagement that going on in the real world isn't quite as fast paced, and everything isn't always that big dopamine hit, it can be harder to kind of get the same level of focus and attention. So I think there's an element of what it might feel like for someone who has ADHD, and for somebody who uses social media a lot but doesn't have ADHD. But I don't think by any stretch that social media causes people to have ADHD. I don't think there's any research that suggests that either, but it certainly does make it harder for people to focus in maybe the way that they could before we had social media. I think for me, social media, because it has so many I'm looking at constant feeds and updates. There's lots of different elements to managing a social media campaign. And, it's analytics, it's checking feeds, it's writing copy, it's checking out trends. There's just lots. And so for me, as someone with ADHD, that works great because I like doing lots of things and multitasking, and it's constant dopamine hits. And it's a creative kind of job role, I would say, certainly for the aspects that I'm working in. And so for me, it works quite well, but not necessarily the case for other people, but yeah, it works for me.
So, but you spend your entire career, literally everything is about social media and the online world. When do you actually ever switch off, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I wasn't particularly good about it in the first few years, maybe of discovering I had ADHD, and then I had my children a few years. It was probably about around that time I had my first child, and I had a family life, and I was trying the ADHD medications, and my job was geared around social media, and so I found it very hard to sort of pull myself away from it because I loved my job. I could suddenly work because I had this medication that helped, and it was very hard to step away from it. But realizing that there are consequences for kind of I think we see in friends of mine who've got relationships. They're one of the top things I hear from friends, partners is always on his phone about people who haven't got ADHD. So we all, to some degree, are too much obsessed and invested in our looking down at our devices instead of looking up. But for me, I do step away. Like when we go on a family holiday, I pretty much don't engage with social media at all, and I turn all of that side of it off. At the end of the day, my phone switches into a mode scheduled so that 6 o'clock, when it hits 6 o'clock on a weekday, my phone goes into a focus mode on iPhone, where you can set turn off all notifications, make the screen black and white, limit who can message and contact me, don't show me notifications for anything, all of that stuff. And I keep that on a weekday when I finish work till the kids have gone to bed. So I find that helps. I also turn off the red dot notifications on all apps for everything always, so I don't ever have any of those red dots which can pull me into things as well. I think those are probably the most obvious things that I do to try and kind of pull me back from being too much online.
I don't know if you've come across people who are completely overwhelmed with their social media, and sometimes you meet people who understand they're doing too much, but they really don't know how to get out of it or take a little bit control back. What would your advice be to those kind of people?
Try and make the time you spend using your phone intentional, that word again, in the sense of it's very easy when you've got nothing else on that you might just pick up your phone and find yourself scrolling through social media endlessly, and doing things that maybe are not as productive as other things that might be more nourishing, that you could do, whether it's seeing other friends or doing something that needs us to get done in the house and things. So having some intention and purpose when you're online can be helpful. I think curating your feeds is a pretty good thing to do fairly regularly, like a couple of times a year, where there's accounts that you're following on social media that are constantly sending posting junk material or things that you actually find trigger you in a negative way, or don't offer don't give you anything value. Then start curating that list, and don't be shy of using the features like restrict and block and mute, either for keywords or for accounts, to kind of curate your time online so it's less chaotic. I think that can be helpful. I think certainly for children and even for adults at times as well, that there are the features where within the platforms where you can get it to remind you when you've spent X amount of minutes online, and or it's a certain time in the evening to nudge you. Those can be a helpful prompt, and also just being better at seeing how you feel after using social media. If you're coming off feeling angry and irritated, or you're not having a good time with social media, or there's a lot going on in your life that means that you're comparing yourself to other people's lives at a time when you've got a lot on your plate, and it's not making you feel any better, it's probably making you feel worse. Then trying to be as best you can self-aware of that, and actually taking a break from social media, because stepping away from it and actually doing other things can take some of the anxiety and stress and pressure away from seeing all of that. It certainly has in my experience.
So it's really much more conscious and active, right, than the passive side that so many are sort of, it's just going along with it and then letting it basically happen to you.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, I do things like I put some of the social media apps in a separate folder so that it's not like it's easy for me to access. You know, at a glance, if I see it, look down, I see a red dot on Facebook or Instagram, it's going to pull me in. Whereas if I turn off the red dots and notifications, and also put all the social media apps in a folder, which means I have to scroll one screen across, then go into a folder to find them. That kind of added friction sometimes can kind of help you step away from social media a bit easier, or certainly not engage as often. I also find that the one that I found the hardest, and I'm still not very good at, is not having my phone in the bedroom. I think it's very easy when like the TV goes off and you're kind of not quite ready for bed to just step onto your phone. And again, these algorithms are geared to keep you on the platform with content it knows you're going to like or find engaging and enticing. And that can be time that is far better spent sleeping or trying to sleep, or not reading something that is going to fire some dopamine when you're just about to try and get some sleep. So I think removing the phone from the bedroom is something is very hard, but can be very, very useful.
So you used to run the Twitter account of then Prime Minister David Cameron. Were there any like wild moments, close calls where you were about to Twitter something that you in the end then didn't do and you probably were happy about it?
I was responsible for managing for a small period of time, the Cabinet Office Twitter account, and then the Civil Service Twitter account, and then I spent some time in 10 Downing Street as well. I certainly remember at least one occasion where I was out with friends doing something after work late into the evening, and I posted something about something to do with the evening had gone wrong, and I was having a nightmare, whatever. And I posted it with like loads of exclamation marks and emojis, and don't think there was any swear words in it. And then I posted it, and then when it said you're now been posted, it took me back to the screen of the account, which was a government account, and I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And my heart was raised. And I was like, it won't connect to the, I can't fight. And I was looking, I think it needs, if it is on that account, I am in so much trouble. And luckily I was like, oh, it was my account. It was my account. So I've had moments like that, but I've been fortunate in my career that I haven't, as far as I know, and touch wood, posted anything from an account that wasn't mine. But yeah, I think social media for government was a tricky place to be in the early 2010s, when writing a tweet would go through about 16 people and it'd be sanitized and rechecked, and then by the time you got it back, it wasn't anything like what you set it out to be. I think those days mostly have gone, but certainly, yeah, it's a different type of job in social media, working either for a celebrity's account or for a government minister's account. But I enjoyed it.
Well, thank the Lord that now you have these options to take things back, right, in a comparably short period of time.
Yeah, the thing is, once it's posted, once it's out there, even if it's for a second, someone will screenshot it. It will be a story in one of the newspapers the next day. So I do feel for social media managers when I see a brand's accidentally posted because the social media managers push through on their wrong account, and then it, all hell breaks loose. So yeah, I have a lot of empathy for those scenarios, and I'm just thankful it hasn't happened to me.
Matt, something is a question I ask every guest. What is one thing that you do every day to help manage your day in a better way?
I keep it simple with notes. I still use paper bits of notes for things, as well as a digital version where I have kind of like 3 things I want, 3 things I must get done, 3 things I'd like to get done, and then 3 things that can wait till later. Kind of, so in terms of prioritizing things, and if I can get through the top 3, then I know I've had a fairly successful day. And if I get into the what I'd like to do items, then that's even better.
I do the same. I still have to write my things down, and then it sort of sticks more. There's
Absolutely.
this thing. Yeah. Well, Matt, it was a great conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking your time. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners did too. And yeah, we'll probably have to ask you again, whatever this year is over, and we're going to see what happens in the world.
It will probably change greatly in 3 months or 6 months, let alone 12 months. But it'd be more than a pleasure to come back at some point in the future.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've learned so much from my chat with Matt. I love how down to earth he is about social media and how to approach it. His philosophy of making everything you do on socials intentional rather than the mindless scroll is so sensible. And I'll definitely be trying to follow his advice on how to take a step away from the phone at bedtime and on holiday. Thanks to Matt for the expert tips. You can find more details on Matt and his work in the show notes. And we've got plenty more great advice to come in each episode of the series. Make sure to click follow so you don't miss any more of the great conversations coming up here. This episode of How Do We Manage was brought to you by Audi, hosted by me, Stephanie von Bismarck, and featured Matt Navarra. It was produced by Tory Pope, the production manager was Angela Crago, and the executive producer was Ellie Martino. The series was recorded and edited at Potshop Studios in London.